Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Inquirer Live. My name is Mike Sielski. I'm one of the Inquirer's two lead sports columnists. It's a thrill to be with you today. And I'm also thrilled to welcome as our guest today someone who probably certainly has, I should say, one of the most recognizable voices in Philadelphia sports history and probably in the history of Philadelphia, period. Someone who I admired when I was a kid and someone who I've been fortunate enough to call a friend for the last several years, the former play-by-play voice of your Philadelphia 76ers, Marc Zumoff. Now, as you probably know, Zoo retired this past summer after spending 27 years calling Sixers games for NBC Sports Philadelphia, for Comcast Sportsnet, and for Prism. He was a Philly kid, and he is a Philly guy through and through. He went to high school in the city. He went to Temple University. He grew up watching Wilt Chamberlain and Hal Greer and Billy Cunningham. And then throughout his career in broadcasting, he got to meet all of those incredible athletes and, of course, dozens more. We're going to spend today talking about his career, his decision to retire, his future now that he's no longer calling Sixers games. And, of course, we're going to talk about the Sixers themselves, his memories of the team, his favorite moments, and, of course, the team's past, present, and future. Just a few housekeeping items before I bring him on. We want you to participate in today's event, and you'll have a chance to do that pretty much any time throughout our discussion. If you'd like to submit a question to Zoo, or you want to throw a topic out there for the two of us to bat around, please ask your question or make your comment on the comment section at the bottom of this page. If you're watching from social media, just visit inquirer.com/Zumoff Live to submit your questions. That's inquirer.com/Zumoff Live. Now, with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Marc Zumoff.
My man.
Hey, Zoo, how you doing?
I'm awesome, dude. I am so happy to be doing this with you. It's going to be fun.
This is going to be great. Now, I'm going to start off with something kind of a little personal that you and I have discussed before. Mm-hmm. We met when I was 11 years old because my grandparents lived on the same block as your mom and dad in Northeast Philadelphia. And I can say to this day that I've never been more intimidated or nervous meeting a member of the media than I was meeting you, because I had grown up watching you on Prism, Sixers games, Flyers games, all of that stuff. So this is a real treat to be able to talk to you like this.
I had similar feelings when I met high-profile people, so I get it. You watch someone on TV, and all of a sudden, wow, they're there, and it's almost surreal. So I'm glad now that we can meet as colleagues and friends and chat away about whatever it is that you want to chat about.
Well, let's start, if we can, with your decision to retire, to step away from broadcasting. What precipitated it? Why was the timing right at the end of this past season?
I always wanted to step away before my skills declined. That was certainly one of the elements that factored into that. I didn't want to overstay my welcome. I know that in our business, if your management likes you, if the team likes you, if the fans like you, they want to hold on to you. It's like an old pair of jeans. Yeah, they're ripped and there's a hole in the knee, but it's my old pair of jeans and it's my go-to and it just feels comfortable. So I probably could have hung in, but I didn't want to do that. And then I started to realize I'm 65 years old. I'm starting to feel a few of the infirmities that affect a 65-year-old, whether it's back problems or what have you. So I said to myself, while I am still viable, while physically and mentally I could still do it, what else is out there in this world besides being the voice of the 76ers? And I have to tell you, Mike, that it's almost like a drug, because you're making really good money. It's a prestigious position. People take note of you. They admire you. You get special treatment because you're on TV and you're the voice of their favorite team. And I love that. I love the perks of it. And I loved all the trappings that went along with the job itself, which was a great position. But I realized that once I was able to step away, let's say in the summertime, and I wasn't involved in that, I said, wow, there's all kinds of other things out here besides doing the Sixers on TV. So those were the two motivating factors. And then, of course, a third was my wife, Debbie, who is my life partner and my best friend. And we want to travel and do some things together. So it all sort of came together and made sense. 65 just sounded right and felt right.
Now, you and I talked about this right after your decision was announced. You had signed a 3-year contract with NBC Sports Philadelphia, and that started the wheels kind of turning, I think, in your head, for okay, maybe down the road I'm gonna step away. We're gonna get into the team as it is now, but I'm really curious. I don't think I asked you this when we talked back in July. Did the way this recent Sixers season ended, with them being the number one seed and losing in the second round of the playoffs, give you any sense of regret? Did you go away thinking, "Oh, man, that had to be my last season"?
Anybody who steps away, and I think of Jim Paschke, who's my colleague with the Milwaukee Bucks, he announced before the playoffs that he was leaving. And what do you know? The Bucks went on and won the title. That's always the perfect scenario. But I learned a long time ago that I have absolutely positively nothing to do with the product on the floor. That wouldn't stop people from coming up to me in the street and say, "Can't you get Ben Simmons to shoot a jump shot?" I mean, they would do that anyway. But no, no regrets whatsoever. I had an awesome run. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of guys my age and younger who do other things in life. They might be very successful, but would love to have the chance to do what I did as a kid growing up in Northeast Philly, doing the games for the team that I grew up rooting for. So regrets, I think, to look back on 27 years of doing the Sixers and regretting anything would be foolhardy at best. It was a great run, and I really enjoyed every second of it.
Let's talk about that kid in Northeast Philly who got the job of his dreams. Your story, I think, for those of us who know it, resonates with a lot of people, and I think will resonate with a lot of young people who want to get into this business, whether it's broadcasting, writing, sports, in whatever kind of form. How did you know you wanted to do this, and what did you think at the time as a youngster, kind of the obstacles would be to you getting into the business?
Obstacles, it was pure fantasy. I just never thought it would happen. I later in life, as I got closer, I felt like the brass ring was within reach. But as a young guy growing up in Northeast Philly, you're just fantasizing, really, is all it amounted to. I just remember as a kid, AM radio stations, and my fellow 60 somethings will remember it. Um, WFIL 560 and Wibbage 99, they played top 40, and the disc jockeys would come on and they would do what's called talking up a record, where
Right.
you would hear the intro in the background, they'd give the weather or some kind of an announcement, and all of a sudden, boom, the lyrics would come in. And I was fascinated by that. So I had records at home. I would sit by the record player and I would pretend that I was a DJ. And I found that I had the timing and I could do the same thing. And I liked that talking and performing. I just found that that was a natural thing for me. And so what I did was I combined that love with my love of sports and began turning the sound down of the TV and doing games into a tape recorder. And it's funny because I often say about NBA players, yes, they've had coaching in high school and college and AAU and whatever, but a lot of what they do on the basketball court is rooted in what they did on the playgrounds wherever they grew up. It's the same thing with me. A lot of the stuff that I did when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, when I turned the sound down to the TV and did games into a tape recorder, I actually did on the air, which made the whole experience that much more surreal. The fact that I did stuff when I was 14 and 15, and I now did it at, I don't know, 40, 50 years later, and I was getting paid for it. It was amazing.
You've described yourself as an ugly duckling as a kid. What do you mean by that, and what kind of role or factor was that in you kind of following this career path?
So first, I want to thank you for the article that you did, and I think you captured it perfectly. My parents were of modest means. I couldn't afford to go to camp or anything like that in the summertime. So basically, I was just home with my own fantasies and my own thoughts. And then, when it came around to school, I was not one of the cool kids. I was kind of chunky, and as I grew older, I was uncomfortable with girls, and I wasn't much of an athlete. And I just kind of kept to myself with a handful of friends, and that was pretty much it. So as I began to achieve some success, I became the Sixers halftime host and, of course, the voice of the team. I always thought about what it was like for me growing up. So whenever I get an email or someone would reach out to me, I always thought it was important for me to reach back to them and be accessible, because I remember what it was like on the outside looking in. So if there are kids out there right now, or anybody out there right now who doesn't feel particularly good about themselves, or they doubt themselves, or they don't think that they can achieve their dreams, I'm not saying that they are going to, but what I'm saying is they should try as best as they can to try to achieve them.
At what point in your education or adolescence or young adulthood did you get a sense that this was a career path that you could follow through on and continue upward on? Was it at Temple? Was it in high school? How did that track go for you?
I went through Temple. I was a radio, TV, film major, and I had every intention on breaking into the business in some form or fashion. But as I'd mentioned earlier, I was of modest means, and my mother never wanted me to go into broadcasting because to her, that was not stable. Quite honestly, my dad had a lot of different jobs growing up. And, if he stayed with a job for a year or so, it was a long time. And frequently he would come home and say he quit or he was fired. And there would be like this darkness in my house for weeks until he got another job. And that made an impression on me. And that, with on top of my mother saying, you need a stable job, you need something that you're going to be able to have a good career in, I went away from it. So by the time I left Temple, I was convinced that I was going to go into a totally different field. And then I had a friend, Larry Rosen, who you might recall was with me at Prism for a while, did Phillies baseball, did a number of things. And he said to me, no, you have talent, you should get into this. So I eventually became a newsman because I was a desk assistant at KYW News Radio, and got a job in Trenton, New Jersey, reading the news for $110 a week. And they were 6 weeks behind on my pay, and they were off the air half the time. But when they finally issued a check for me for $90 and some cents, I stared at it and said, this is unbelievable. I just got paid to talk on the radio. And I was hooked from there on in. I knew I was going to make it a career.
If in an alternative universe, if you hadn't spent your career as the voice of the Sixers, what else would you have done?
That is a great question. And I will say this, I'm not good at many things. In fact, I'm not good at most things. I'm not handy. I would not make a good doctor. I wouldn't make a good lawyer. I wouldn't make a good, I don't know what I would do. But I think the one thing that I would probably be good at is PR, because one of the things that I think I am good at is schmoozing. So, for those who don't know the term, it's basically figuring a way to get along with people, saddling up and making friends, or influencing people in some form or fashion, whether it's in a business sense or just making friends, talking at parties, that kind of thing. So I find that I'm pretty good at that. So probably public relations or something like that.
What was it like to finally get the dream job, right? Like you're working at Prism. I believe you're the studio host for the Sixers for a while, and that kind of is your apprenticeship to becoming the play-by-play voice. The team wasn't very good when you got the job. What was it like to call games initially? You're a rookie, the team is struggling. Put me back there in 1993, 1994, 1995.
I was so riveted after getting the job and achieving a dream that all I wanted to do was figure out a way to be as good as I could possibly be and keep the job. So that was my level of concentration. You're talking about the John Lucas years, where the team, one year they won, I think, 18 games, and one year they won 20 games. There were players going in and out of the lineup. And Luke, he's a great guy from the standpoint that he has counseled many over the years as it relates to substance abuse. And he was all about rescuing people. So he would bring in former substance abusers or players who had been suspended by the NBA for violating the substance abuse policy. And quite frankly, because they had other issues with their character, they didn't last long, they didn't play very well. So it literally would make great material for a book one day if I decided to sit down and do that. But I just kind of ignored that stuff.
Yeah.
and concentrated on being as good as I could be. And I guess it worked because I had the job for another 25 years.
One of my favorite stories from back at that time is right after the Sixers drafted Sean Bradley with the second overall pick in 1993. And for those of you on the video watching who don't know who Sean Bradley is, he was a 7'6" center from Brigham Young University, who the Sixers drafted after he had spent 2 years in a Mormon mission. And he was so skinny. And Zoo, you can correct me here if I'm wrong, because I've heard this story. I obviously wasn't around the team then. As part of a team promotion, they had cheesecakes at practice, and they would feed them to Sean to try to get him to gain weight, and then he would eat the cake, practice, and then throw up afterwards.
I think one of the times he threw up was because Pat Croce, who later became president of the team, was the conditioning guy, and he, tried to get him to, I guess, improve his aerobic capacity. And at one point, he threw up after a practice, if I recall. But I remember one year, maybe after his first or second year, they put him on a diet of milkshakes, and he came back like artificially heavy. And he wasn't particularly strong, and he lost some of his mobility, but he made weight. So, that quickly, I guess, disintegrated because eventually he was traded for Derek Coleman, as I recall.
That's right.
And, Sean eventually found his place. He became a pretty good shot blocker, made some money. And unfortunately, he has reached a point now where I believe he's a quadriplegic because of an accident that he had. So we certainly wish him all the best. One of the nicest guys around, and just, didn't reach the level of achievement that one might expect from the number one pick in the draft.
You mentioned you were focusing so much on your job at the time, but okay, you get 2 or 3 years in, you're getting more comfortable, I'm sure. The team still isn't getting better, though. How do you kind of balance that? I mean, it's difficult to, you're calling games for this team, you're trying to make it interesting for the audience. You certainly want to accentuate the positive. There just isn't very much positive. How did you negotiate that for the first few years that you were in the job?
There were many ways to do it. Particularly when the team was bad, new players were coming in and out. So we always used to say, hey, it's time to meet the new guy. And that's what we would talk about for the next few games, trying to acquaint people with him, what his game was about, what kind of a guy he was, that sort of thing. And then it became sort of micro research, if you will. So let's say there was a player who the Sixers were high on. They were trying to develop. Jerry Stackhouse, an example, who I guess was the third pick in his draft, and he was supposed to be one of the heroes and do great things for the team, but was never really known as a good outside shooter. So if he reached a particular streak where, let's say, his field goal percentage was up or he was making more shots from the outside, you would trumpet things like that. And then, of course, there was the opponent. When Shaquille O'Neal or Michael Jordan or somebody else came in the building, my goodness, that was all you talked about, especially because the Sixers were getting killed. So I spent a lot of time doing that. Just a lot of research, storytelling, and, the score and everything else spoke for itself. So I kind of ignored it and went on to a lot of other things.
We've got a question in the chat room from someone who asks, besides all the all-stars and starters and primary players, who are some of your favorite guys, role players, from your years around the Sixers? Are there, guys maybe who don't leap to mind as, superstars or very famous players who really stand out in your memory as being great guys or great characters?
The 2001 team was a bunch of those guys because Allen was clearly the star, and then a lot of people would be hard-pressed to name the starters. You had Theo Ratliff in the middle, and yes, he was later traded for a Hall of Famer, Dikembe Mutombo, but you had Tyrone Hill and George Lynch as the forwards, and Eric Snow in the same backcourt with Allen. So right there you had guys who subjugated their offense and decided that they were going to be role players, be tough guys, be physical. And it was Larry Brown's genius who surrounded Allen with those guys because the rules allowed you then to play the kind of game that kept the game in the 90s and allowed them to be physical. So I've always liked players who have been very good on the defensive end. So if you speed up to today's game, Matisse Thybulle was always a favorite of mine. I say always, he's only been with the team for a couple of years, but he's the guy who, even though he might not score, can come into the game and change the complexion of the game with a steal, with a tip, with shutting down a guy who's hot, taking a charge, doing something to get the crowd back into the game. So I've always loved players like that. And those are just a few examples. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question exactly as it was asked, but as I sit and recollect, those guys certainly come to mind.
You mentioned Allen Iverson, and his arrival certainly kind of changed the entire complexion of the franchise. I covered the team a little bit back then during his tenure. What was it like at peak Iverson? When we're talking 99 in that first round series against the Orlando Magic, when the team gets back to the postseason for the first time in, I think, 8 years. The following year, they get to the second round again. The finals run in 01. Describe what that was like at that time.
Allen was a rock star, and he was a guy who changed the NBA landscape in that I think he led the convergence of entertainment and basketball. So whether it was his ill-fated attempt at being a rapper, it was probably more having to do with his choice of jewelry and clothing and lifestyle and bringing all that into the forefront. So there's certainly that element. And then the fact that he was just so unique as a player that we went around the league, and no matter how bad a team was performing in that city, they sold out the building because he was just one of those once in a lifetime guys. I mean, think about it. He was maybe 6 feet. He was maybe 165 pounds and played the game in a way that was just relentless. He would throw his body into the lane. He would get knocked to the floor constantly by players literally twice his size, would dust himself off, would go to the line, would make his free throws, and then the very next possession would do the same thing. And I think that playing style, and sure, there were a lot of things that happened off the floor, and people might say that he, took way too many shots per game, but you could never, ever, ever question his heart. And we say all the time in Philly, if players would only show heart, yes, they might lose, or sure, they might turn the ball over, or fail at one thing, or not do well in another thing, but only if they show heart, because we have heart in Philly. We're always trying our best. And that's why I think Allen is just adored to this day because of the way he played the game and the passion that he showed while he was doing it.
That segues to a question I wanted to ask you anyway, which is that those teams that did well in the late 90s and early 2000s with Allen kind of had a different style and complexion, so to speak, than the ones in recent years that have had relatively high expectations with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. I think certain fans or members of the fan base might perceive them differently because the ones in the late 90s and early 2000s were perceived to be overachieving. Did that sort of perception play into it all? Not your enthusiasm for calling the games, because you're a professional and you're a Sixers fan, you're going to be excited. But did it bring a little more juice when the Sixers get to the finals because nobody expects them to get to the finals, or Allen Iverson hits a big shot because, as you said, he's so small and kind of an underdog sort of thing? Did it make a difference for you?
No.
Okay.
I was clearly.
I'll cross that question off my list.
No, listen, Mike. I mean, I'm just trying to be as direct and honest as I can. For me, first of all, just the privilege of doing Sixers basketball never wore out for me. It never became something that I became jaded with. So whether the team was doing well or not so well, I just felt happy and privileged to be there. As for this team, sure, there have been some disappointments. I mean, my goodness, to look at last year and the way they dissolved in the playoffs, and to think that anybody would be satisfied with the way that went, you'd be kidding people at best. So they were a real disappointment. However, I do think in the NBA, and this is Ben Simmons notwithstanding, and he's probably now out of the equation, it takes time. Michael Jordan, it took him some time. Magic Johnson in his rookie year, yes, he did lead the Lakers to a championship, but I think that was an anomaly. I think for the most part in our league, whether it's becoming an all-star or becoming a champion, it often takes time. The Bucks are another example of how they were knocking on the door for 2, 3, 4 years with Giannis Antetokounmpo before they finally got to the mountaintop. So I'm as impatient as the next guy now. I want to see this team do well because I know the Joel Embiid window is going to be open for just a certain period of time. But again, in answer to your question, no. Yes, it's great when they surprise you and they get to the finals, but no, there's really no comparing what happened then with what's happening or not happening now.
We've got a couple of questions related to Ben Simmons in the chat. People are asking, do you think he can come back? Is there any chance he would come back and play? And secondarily, what went through your mind when you saw him pass up that layup in Game 7 against the Hawks?
So, last question first. Like everybody else, I was running around my living room screaming, "What is he doing? What's going on?" It was something that almost seemed surreal at the time. In terms of Ben Simmons, what was the first question?
Do you
Do we
think there's
think
any chance he would come back and play
I
for the
mean, sure,
Sixers?
there's a chance. Of course, there's a chance. Um, Sometimes I sit and I fantasize and I say to myself, and as demanding as we are as Sixer fans and as Philadelphia sports fans, I think that redemption is a big part of how we feel that, yes, anybody can redeem themselves if they are willing to get with the program, be a part of the team, love the city, and love us as fans. If Ben would somehow, and this would seem unlikely at this point, have some sort of a, I don't know, some sort of a moment where he said to himself, you know what? I do have some accountability. I do have some issues with my game. I do need to, acknowledge my shortcomings and try to become a better player. My team needs me. I want to be part of the team. Joel and I have already put in a lot of work, and this is my best, most immediate opportunity to win an NBA title. Philadelphia, I would love to come back. Can you imagine
Oof.
if something even close to that came from his lips in some sort of a news conference? It would be one of the greatest sports stories in the history of our city, especially since his holdout, I think, is unprecedented.
Yeah.
Here's a guy who's playing for a really good team, who's got a multi-year contract. Who ever heard of a guy holding out in circumstances like that? So that's the way I see it as far as Ben's concerned. I hope he does have a change of heart. I think the team would welcome him back. I think the players would welcome him back, and I think the city would welcome him back.
To shift gears a little bit, we've got a couple of questions about the analysts that you've worked with over the years. Steve Mix was mentioned, of course, your most recent color analyst, Ala Abdul Nabi. People want to know how you're able to develop such terrific chemistry with your analysts. What goes into that, and how are you able to achieve it as quickly as you do?
I think in some ways it's almost like a marriage where there are ups and downs and there are arguments and there are great times. That's not to say I've had that with my color analysts. I don't believe that I have. But what you need to do is you need to trust each other. You need to get to know one another. You need to understand that you're teammates and you're sharing airtime because you both can't talk at once. And you are there to try to make yourselves look good, to try to be entertaining and informative, and do what's necessary to pull that off. I know that one of the highest bits of praise I could ever get is not, oh, I enjoy that call, or you sounded really good tonight, or any of that sort of thing. You guys sound good together. When I hear that, that makes me feel good. So I've strived to do that. And fortunately, I have had partners like Steve and like Ala who have done the same thing.
Your successor debuts tonight, Kate Scott. Tell me about her. I know you knew her before the announcement was made that she was going to succeed you. How did that transition happen? Did you have any say-so in it? Tell Philadelphia about the new voice of the Sixers.
I really didn't have a say-so, although I did have the opportunity to later hear her audition. And I remember taking some notes and thinking to myself, here's someone who is absolutely, positively qualified for the job and has the potential to be excellent and endear herself to Sixers fans for years to come. The one thing that Sixers fans have to get used to is the fact that for the first time in the history of professional sports in our city, a woman is their voice. So I'm going to ask Sixers fans to do this. Just judge Kate on what it is that she is doing as the TV voice of the Sixers. And I have every confidence in the world that she will be great at it. And once you realize that she is great at it and she has chemistry with Ala Abdenabi, which I'm confident is going to happen, she will begin to endear herself to you. I think she's going to be really, really good.
We've got a question from a viewer who's asking what your number one memory of the 1982-83 championship team is.
Well, there are many different memories. Of course, that was my first year covering the team as the halftime host. So I was a little bit overwhelmed by the whole thing. You know, Mike, you had started our chat by saying that you were kind of freaked out by meeting me because I was already on TV and you were just a young kid visiting your grandparents. Well, it was kind of the same thing for me. I'd actually arrived on the scene admiring Dr. J and Bobby Jones and, of course, Moses Malone. And now that I was actually covering them, it was intimidating for me, to say the least. So I remember a lot of that as the halftime guy, just trying to get over that fear. I also remember that team, especially at home, dominating teams. I mean, literally blowing teams out by halftime. The game was just over. Other teams simply did not have a chance. You could tell there was sort of this missionary zeal about the team. They had gotten to the finals in 77 and 80 and 82. And they wanted to win a ring for Doc because his professional window was closing. And Moses Malone, thanks to Harold Katz, was absolutely positively the perfect remedy. He gave the team toughness. He gave them rebounding. He gave them everything they needed from that particular spot. And they went on to win the title. So I would say just the sheer dominance, the way they shut down teams defensively, and how they came together with a former MVP who later became an MVP that season, joining the team and gelling as they did. It was just unbelievable to watch.
So if that's your first year as the halftime host and your career with the Sixers lasts until 2021, that's a long time. You had to have had, I would think, at least an opportunity, if not a passing thought, to take a national job. You certainly, a gentleman named Chuck is on our chat asking this. He says you're certainly talented enough. Did you not want to? Why not? Why stay in Philadelphia?
I had really reached nirvana. This was perfect for me. I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else. I did have some opportunities to do some national things. I did some sideline and some play-by-play for Turner. I had the opportunity in 2016 to cover the Olympics in Rio. I did women's basketball for NBC. And the one thing that I found was that the higher you go in our business, the less you do and the more you get paid to do it. Other than that, I was perfectly happy being the voice of the Sixers. I grew up admiring, among others, one of the four people on my Mount Rushmore was Gene Hart. I just always wanted to be Gene Hart. And I love the fact that he was the voice of a team, that he was there for the ups and the downs, and the fans were glued to everything he had to say and how important it was. You know, when you're a national guy, you're kind of playing it down the middle and you know, you're allegedly neutral. Of course, Philly fans might think otherwise with some of the national broadcasters, but that's for another day. Right. But no, I had a great gig and I wasn't about to try to give it up. And oh, by the way, we got to fly charter with the Sixers, which is an unbelievable luxury. And I'd have to fly commercial to my national gigs. So that was another deciding factor.
Well, all right. So you're broadcasting games for this team you love. And then in 2013, the Sixers embark on the process, which, to be blunt about it, involves a word that's come up in Philadelphia over and over again over the last several years: tanking. The team is going to kind of break itself down to build itself back up. That's the plan that Sam Hinkie has. How different was it calling games during that period compared to when the team was not so good in previous years, or even compared to when it got good again or had been previously? I would imagine that was a completely unique experience, kind of separate from everything else you did in your job.
It's really a great point, Mike, because in other years, at least they were trying to win.
Right.
It was pretty clear they were not trying to win. and they were willing to accept the consequences to get high draft picks and build that way. I remember the first year of the process, they had training camp at St. Joe's, and walking in, and I had been an NBA head since the early 60s. I did not recognize any of the players. And this was my own team that I
Hmm.
was the voice of, and I didn't recognize any. Tony Roten, I had no idea who Tony Roten was. And so it was a very unique experience, you're right, from that perspective. So I had to continue to, well, what I had to do was brush off what I did when I first got the job during the John Lucas years and just talk about these players as if they were, part of the future, which I knew they were not. Or when the opponent came in, talk about them. Or again, the micro stories. Oh, this guy's being a better shooter, or oh, this guy just did some nice charity work. Let's talk about that. But it had its own unique challenges, and I'll tell you what. I think in some ways, by the third year, certainly of it, it had begun to wear on all of us. I think a little bit. Brett Brown, I think, started to feel a little bit. I know that Al and I began to feel it a little bit, and the fact that they were not trying to win was something that, quite frankly, became a little bit of a burden. But I got through it, and better days were ahead. And I'm not sure if I would endorse necessarily the process or the way it was done, but you can't argue with the results. The Sixers are one of the better teams right now in the NBA.
One of the two things that kind of opposite sides of Philadelphia sports itself is obviously the kind of provincialism, the parochialism, the loyalty and knowledge that fans and media members, to be quite frank, have of these teams. And then the freedom and the willingness of those fans and those media members to criticize their teams, right? It's we love you and we're going to tell you that we hate you, and that shows you how much we love you, right? Like the booing shows that people care. How hard is it to walk that line when you were in the job that you're in? And were there times, whether it was during the process or any other times, where you might have been saying to yourself, "I hear you, folks. I understand why you're booing, and I wish I could boo alongside you."
I didn't say that, but I would acknowledge at times the booing because we know how we express our opinion in Philly. And perhaps then I felt it was warranted. Joel Embiid himself has said it's warranted. I get why people boo in Philly. They work hard. They want to see different results. They deserve to do it. And sometimes we deserve to hear it. But I never made a big issue of it because I just didn't feel it was my job. I feel it's your job to do that. I feel it's the job of sports talk show hosts to do it, sports directors of, uh, you know, news stations in our market. It's their job to do it. It's not my job to do it. My job is to entertain and inform. Remember now, I'm working for NBC Sports Philadelphia, and they have a business relationship with the 76ers. And it would not help me in any way, and I certainly wouldn't be helping my employer nor the team if I was overly critical. Sure, if the team is turning the ball over and they turn it over 10 times in a quarter, of course I'm going to say that's way too many. But I never made it personal, and I never got to the point where I was pointing the fingers at individual players or members of management or anything like that. I just do not believe, and I don't think there is any voice of any team in any professional sport who feels it's their job to do that as well.
When you think back to your career, what moments come to mind first? A moment during the run to the '01 finals, a moment recently, anything. When you think that call, that moment, which ones spring to mind?
It's funny because we're artists, so we're not just putting together automobiles in a factory or something of that nature. What we do is judge subjectively. And so, because you're an artist, you always ruminate about the things you felt you could have done better. So, I always think about, should have made a better call there. Can't believe I made a mistake there, that kind of thing. So, you end up obsessing about that stuff. For example, one of the calls that people say they enjoy was there was an afternoon game. I want to say maybe the day after Thanksgiving. Sixers are playing Washington at Wells Fargo Center. Allen Iverson comes up with a steal of an inbounds pass, races, 50 feet for what turned out to be the game-winning layup. And there were two things, and people, oh, what a call, blah, blah, blah. Well, as I obsess about it, there are two things. One, I wasn't feeling well that day. So if you listen closely, my voice cracks towards the end of the call. And the second thing was the fact that I was yelling, he won the game, he won the game. Well, he didn't win the game because I believe there was still 0.3 of a second left on the clock. And it was an opportunity for Washington to get a tip at the basket or something like that. So one game that I do remember, which was
You're
always my
human,
favorite
sir.
game. What's that?
I said
Well,
you're
yeah,
human, sir.
of course. But, if you ever watch the movie Black Swan with Natalie Portman, how she obsesses over the fact that she's getting the lead in the ballet, and the whole movie is about her imagining that she's going to totally screw it up. Well, believe me, all of us as broadcasters, especially those of us who do it live, we all feel that way. We're all insecure, and we're all, hey, did I do that right? Did I make a mistake? How did I sound? That kind of thing. But my favorite game of all time was still that Game 3 of the playoff series in '99. It was the first home playoff game for the Sixers in 8 years, and Allen Iverson had an NBA record 10 steals, and the Sixers would go on to upset the Orlando Magic. They were a 6 seed, and the Magic was a 3 seed in that series. It will always be my favorite game to have done as a Sixer broadcaster.
So, how are you going to spend retirement? What are you doing? I know I believe you've accepted a new position at Temple. If you could tell us a little bit about that, and then what else? What are you going to do to fill your time?
I just put the finishing touches on the second edition of a sportscasting textbook. Yes, you are right. I am the associate director, and proud to be so, of the Claire Smith Sports Media Center, and that is going to focus on not only teaching young people how to be sports media professionals, but teaching them all aspects, whether it's performance, production, advertising, marketing, public relations. They'll know it all in some form or fashion by the time they graduate. And the other piece of that Claire Smith Sports Media Center will be following in her footsteps. She's a woman of color, a Hall of Fame baseball writer for many years. And we are going to take her spirit and what she did as a pioneer and help people of color, help women to gain a more equal footing once they enter the job market. And hopefully, we do think the time has come for that, whether it's Me Too or whether it's Black Lives Matter. This is the time for us as a society to seize on that and promote equality and diversity. And that's what we're going to do with the Claire Smith Sports Media Center. In addition to that, Maccabi USA, the Maccabi Games and the Jewish Olympics in Israel every 4 years, and next summer will be the next set of games. And I'm going to be taking 14 aspiring sports media professionals to Israel with me. They can go to MaccabiUSA.com and they can apply. And it's going to be an opportunity to cover an international sporting event like the Olympics as a college student or either a high school student. We're going to stream games. We're going to do interviews, reporter packages, print matter, that sort of thing. And I just asked my wife to ask her friend who has a husband who plays in the Philadelphia Orchestra to recommend a flute teacher, because I have a new flute that's been sitting around for a lot of years and I want to break it out and start to play it.
I think you also said you wanted to relearn Spanish. You had taken Spanish in high school.
Yes, I want to take Spanish again. And oh, by the way, I'm building a home here, and that takes up a lot of time as well. That's another thing I don't know anything about, but fortunately, I have my wife who's a lot better looking and a lot smarter and everything else to ride herd on that. But every once in a while, I have to chip in, and I've been busy doing that as well.
Do you miss the broadcasting yet?
I'll let you know tonight.
Yeah.
When I check it out. I suspect that I won't. Let me rephrase that. I'm so busy with other things that it will lessen the impact. But my goodness, of course, there are aspects that I'm going to miss. There's no substitute for being live on TV. If you like walking a tightrope without a net and the challenge of having to get it right the first time, of doing the games for the team you grew up rooting for, of being the voice of the fan. My goodness, I'm giving myself chills. Yes, I'm going to miss every single second of all of that. I'm going to miss the people that I worked with, whether it's Ala Abdinabi or my producer, J.R. Aquila or Sean Alexiak or any one of a number of others that, I've interacted with over the years, Sean being my most immediate boss. Those are things I'm going to miss as well, but it's all for the better. This was a great run for me, and all great things come to an end. And as somebody once said to me recently, it's not where you've been, but where you're going to. And that's what I'm concentrating on right now.
One last question. How did you develop, and I think this would be something fans would be interested in, how did you develop your signature calls? Whether it was yes or, locking all windows and doors, all the catchphrases that Sixers fans came to associate with you. How did you come up with them and how did you refine them over time?
Mike, as you know, being a writer, the more you write, the more comfortable you become with the English language in terms of word usage, in terms of metaphors and similes and everything that goes into making you the very good writer that you are. So in my case, as the halftime guy, I scripted hundreds and hundreds of features, and I wrote for other aspects of my job. And all of that writing made me that much more comfortable with the English language. That, and the fact that I was inspired by another guy on my Mount Rushmore, Mike Emmerich, who could describe a slap shot 10 different ways because he was comfortable with the English language, and that's what made him more comfortable. And so as the TV announcer for a team where people can already see the action, the challenge is how, as you, the TV voice of the team, how can you add to the fabric of the broadcast? So I started coming up with these phrases, and it just felt right. Some of them I threw out there didn't feel right. Some of them, you would throw them out there and you'd see on Twitter and you'd get a lot of this and you just didn't use it again. But there were a number, I guess, that stuck and people seemed to like them. So I kept using them. And now I've even taken Garbage into Gold and I've trademarked it. And I sell T-shirts with Garbage into Gold on there to benefit Philadelphia Youth Basketball, which is a local charity.
Like on the Wildwood Boardwalk, do we see Garbage into Gold T-shirts?
No, you got to order it online, but
okay.
No, I'm not. I haven't gotten to the point where they're on the Wildwood Boardwalk. No.
So, all right, let's talk about this upcoming Sixers season.
Mm-hmm.
Assume for the sake of argument that Ben Simmons is not in the equation. How does the team look to you?
So Shake Milton and Tyrese Maxey, I think a lot is going to fall on them. I think that if, and I haven't seen any practices and I didn't see the game in Toronto the other night, but I have the feeling that those two are competing for minutes. Ben Simmons is a remarkable defensive player. He is a willing passer who's got great vision. So they're going to miss that aspect of it, his ability to push the pace. Maxey, though, I think offers a different dimension in that he has a great ability to get to the rim. So, we'll see how that develops. I think that's going to be the key to the whole thing is who plays point, how that manifests itself, and can they overcome defensively what Ben Simmons gave them every night? Because remember, you have a guy here who is a physical freak. He was able to play anybody at any time defensively. And I'm positive that when Doc Rivers and his assistants would game plan, Ben was the first guy they talked about in terms of defensively who they would assign him to. So you'll see. We'll see. It's going to be really interesting.
No, I agree with you completely. And I want to thank you. This wraps up our time together. Thank you so much for doing this. And I think I speak for Sixers fans and people who've been listening to you for a long time, where we say, thank you and, just appreciate everything you've done over the last 27 years for basketball fans in this city.
Well, back at you. And tell me again how that meeting went. Were we introduced when you were a little kid?
It went great. We were. My
Was
grandparents.
I nice to you?
You were very nice. I think I stuttered my way through about 30 seconds of conversation. Mr. Zumoff, but I got through it, and I can say this last 45 minutes went much more smoothly than that initial meeting. I can say that for certain.
By the way, the admiration is mutual. Keep on keeping on, bro. You do a great job.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marc Zumoff.
Got it.
Thank you to everyone who joined us. This has been Inquirer Live.